So my name is Audrey Rossow. I'm this, as Dr. Jeffrey mentioned, I'm the Senior Director of Clinical Operations at a small biotech company in Lexington, Massachusetts called Pulmatrix. And what I'm going to talk about is how many internal ClinOps resources you should have for study startup. And when I say internal, I mean at sponsor companies. And I am a department of one. And so, if you look at the Pulmatrix website and look at our pipeline, I'm kind of stretched kind of thinly. But I wanted to make the case a couple of years ago when I was previously a consultant of why it's important to have the appropriate number of resources internally. As many of you know, you can't just sign the CRO and vendor agreements and then just kind of walk away and wait till the data comes in, right? So you have to support your CRO, you have to partner with them. And this, again, is just about study startup. So there's, of course, other phases of the study, including enrollment and data cleaning and reporting and so forth. So why is it important? Basically, it's E6R2, good clinical practice, basically states that the sponsor, the buck ends with us. So we have to ensure oversight of any trial-related functions carried out on our behalf to any other party. And I guess I think R3 is in the works, it's in draft form. So basically it's mandatory, and it's also just a good practice. So I'm on slide importance of right resourcing. So why is it important? Well, one has to make a business case, as I call it, to be able to either, work with consultant ClinOps people or hiring or whatever the model may be. But you have to make a business sense. And for me, the biggest sense is just the matter of risk. So the stakes are high. So a company my size, our size, we're constantly looking for, funding and partnering, and, many a company has gone out of business, just because they had one thing in early, mid, late phase that failed. So it's very important that we get our stuff, our studies conducted in a way that's safe and with quality data. And then again, the second bullet I have here is the competition is great. So I don't know what's going to happen at JP Morgan this January, but there's just only so many dollars, and as you all know, there are hundreds and hundreds of companies out there that are, my size anyway, biotechs that are looking for support. And then change is a given. So if you're very resourced in a very lean fashion, something's going to happen on the study. It always does, right? Because if it didn't change and things just went exactly as planned, I wouldn't have a job. So it's really important that we be able to flex, our resources and our oversight as needed. And so along those lines, our industry is highly regulated, and regulations and guidances change over time. So you have to, again, flex with those changes. And again, I mentioned E6R2, proper sponsor oversight is mandatory. And I know we all know that, but when you're stretched thin, the question is, what does that look like? And we'll get into that a little bit later. And then the last thing is the performance of the CRO, your clinical CRO, is not known in advance, even if you've worked with them quite a bit, unless you get the right team and you get that team over and over again, which again, in my company, is not an easy task to achieve. You'll have some change there, and maybe even some turnover. So the next slide is, when does CRO oversight begin? So this is a little quiz. It's not a formal poll, but should we start doing CRO oversight activities after the first interim monitoring visit at the site? Or B, when you begin to qualify and select the CRO? C, once the trial master file is created? Or D, once the first subject is enrolled? And on the next slide, you'll see the answer is when you begin to qualify and select your CRO. Because that's the relationship you want to build at the get-go, to kind of build the foundation of proper oversight, which really relies on partnering and proper expectation management. So on the next slide, I have a list of different manuals and plans required for study startup. This is a long list. Does every study need all of these? No. Can you combine some of these? Yes. Do they have to be 40 pages long? Certainly not. But what I have found is by kind of, teeing these up and making sure that we have them, that the CRO understands that we need all of these, which, 99% of the time, of course, they do, but also that we are, again, staffed appropriately internally to be able to review all of those things. So that's, again, oversight. We have to review them and sign off on most, if not all of them. So it's a long list. It's a lot of work. And, not everybody in the company is going to understand that, or it may look like overkill. And again, some of these you could, I'm working on a study that's hopefully going to start in the fall and in December, and we're combining the project management plan, the communication plan, and the risk management plan. So, you want to fit these things, but it's once you have them, you can always look back and, that's your documentation of your oversight. Having a quality oversight plan separately is also, highly recommended. So my next slide, so who's responsible for the critical pieces of CRO oversight? When I look at it sort of like in clinical operations, ideally I want to mirror the folks at the CRO. So if I have a clinical project manager, I want an equivalent internally. So, working on timeline management, budget management, CRO and vendor oversight. But then that's sort of the 30,000-foot view. Then you have, more of the, day-to-day clinical operation lead types thing. Like, they have different names in different companies, CTM, clinical trial manager. We used to call them lead CRAs. And that's more of the site-specific, selection, informed consent review, IRB, and ethics submissions, budgets and contracts, training and support, and then the oversight of the CRA. So having done a lot of different things and having consulted for about 10 years, I have both skill sets, so that's great. But again, it's a matter of, division of labor and understanding, who's responsible for what pieces of study startup. So blind spot. So ClinOps resourcing tends to be a little bit of a blind spot. Again, as I mentioned, the folks you're trying to convince, talk to about resourcing and capacity, don't necessarily know what we do. And if you think that list of manuals and plans is long, you should see my startup Gantt chart, and quickly you'll get sort of deer caught in headlights because they shouldn't know that. That's why they hired you. But it just translating that into understanding all the work that has to be done, and then what can't get done or can't get done as quickly as you want. And there's always the whole saying of pick speed, money, or quality. Pick two, but I think you need to pick three. So in our world. So and the second thing is the CROs are really expensive. It's not a fault. It's a business. But when you're spending millions and millions of dollars, it becomes very touchy very quickly with either your CEO or your board or both, and finance, and needing to explain things like change orders and so forth. So again, proper resourcing means proper study startup, which really starts with contracting the CRO and making sure, to the degree possible, you have everything included at the get-go. So my next slide is calculating the number of FT, full-time equivalents you need. And again, this could be part-time consultants. It doesn't really matter. But what I've done, and it's not fancy, it's Microsoft Excel, is outline all the ClinOps tasks needing to be accomplished in startup. And again, I do that in a Gantt, a Microsoft Project Gantt. Apply the number of human hours associated with, and then tackle finite tasks first, and then ongoing tasks. And I'll show you what that looks like. But the drivers, obviously, with all of this, is the phase of the study, the therapeutic area, how many sites, how many subjects, how many countries, how many vendors, and of course, the complexity of the protocol. So a single ascending dose study in healthy volunteers is going to look a little bit different than a phase 3 global study in a rare disease. And just be thinking about what other drivers might affect the head count. I won't get into the COVID-19 pandemic, but I have a study now that's in closeout, and one of the countries we're in is having a real serious spike, and can't return some of the equipment that we need. So again, I said things change, things come up. How are we resourced to risk mitigate something that most of us didn't see coming? So finite tasks, I consider they have a start date and a stop date. So ideally, the final protocol, for example, statistical analysis plan, trial master file plan, data management plan, these things, you get the draft, you review it, maybe a couple rounds of review, you send it back, finalize and sign off. They can change over time and you reversion them. But basically they are recurring, but hopefully not too much during the life of your trial. And the next slide is ongoing tasks. So those are things that repeat over time. So, what's the task? How long does it take? How often does it occur in its duration? So for example, weekly teleconference calls or sponsor visits to the clinical sites or monitoring visit report review. So there's a volume piece of this. There's a volume piece of finite tasks, but for here, it's really, again, a question of using a formula to say, what do I have to do? How long will it take? So on my next slide, so this is finite tasks. Again, I just took that list of manuals and plans. Again, they're not all needed. I put total hours needed. So if you look at the right, I said includes initial draft, 2 rounds of review, and final approval, and it assumes a 40-hour work week. So let's just say, let me see, statistical analysis plan, 40 hours. So that's a week, but it'd be over, however many weeks. So this is 412 hours of someone's time to do all of this. And mind you, this is ClinOps because you have other folks in your organization that also need to take a look at this. But as a lead, this is what I would budget. More or less is certainly, you can be flexible. So assuming a full-time person or work week, that gets you to about 10 weeks to get all these done. And some can be done concurrently. But again, if you just pile this together, it's a lot of time. You could have, 2 people work on all of these and split the work, and then you've got it in 5.15 weeks. And then, so ongoing tasks, I just picked things like, external TCONs, including agenda and minutes, how long does it take, including agenda and minutes, about 3 hours. Now you might say, well, my CRO is doing that. So I just sit on the call, they take the minutes, they send me the agenda, but you're going to review those minutes and, edit that agenda, et cetera, et cetera. And then how often, what's the unit weekly? So say for 26 weeks, so about half a year of startup, that gets you to 78 hours over time. Travel for sponsor visits, anything that's recurring. And again, there are many more things than this. This is really mainly study startup. And again, on the right, I have a caveat, does not include protocol amendments, CRO or staff turnover at the sites, or responses to regulatory authorities. So now you have all this other stuff that's recurring. It takes about 6 months of a full-time person. So if you can add to that, you can speed up your study startup. Now, again, this can be flexible. Someone could say, well, you don't need 32 hours a month on risk mitigation. But, it's really just, again, it's a formula. If anybody wants the Excel tool, I'm happy to share it. I'm sure there are better tools out there. So we are at about 20 past the hour. Clinical trials, the bottom line is they're unpredictable, they're expensive, and they're complex. And we need to resource appropriately, but it doesn't always happen. And when it doesn't, it really increases the risk to the trial and to the sponsor. And it just puts a lot of stress to bear on the system. That being said, we get what we get, and we do the best we can do. But my job is to, I report to my CEO, so my job is always to keep him informed about what's at risk. And in our company, things change every other day, so it's not an easy task to resource. And then again, there are many configurations you can use. Again, it really depends on how you're structured, how big your department is, how where the responsibilities lie, the clinical development plan, on and on and on, to make sure you just have proper oversight. So just reading monitor trip reports, isn't going to cut it. That's an important part of it. But there are so many other pieces. And again, this is study startup. So with that, I will probably just see if there are any chat questions.
There are a couple of questions for you. The first one, one attendee is asking Audrey, which task do you see becoming obsolete or not needed in the future?
That's a really good question. That's a really good question. I don't know. I think I can say for sure that I think some of the on-site pieces are going to have to be pivoted to remote based on COVID, and also the region you're working in. But again, maybe we'll see what E6R3 looks like. But we don't have to review, for example, every single monitoring visit report. And FDA told us that many years ago with the concept of risk-based monitoring. So I think it just really requires a lot of flexibility and a risk management plan, and just saying, where are the risks? What can we live without? In fact, I just did a risk management plan for an upcoming trial, and it was not a fun exercise, but it was important for me to understand where the real risk was in terms of the likelihood, the ability to detect it, and then its impact. So I hope that helps answer your question. I don't think oversight will ever go away, but I think it will shift as we go over, as we go through time, particularly in the age of COVID.
Wonderful. And we have one last question from you from Farah Ahmed. And she's asking, have you considered technology to automatically calculate resourcing needs based on study assumptions and budget?
Good question, Farah. It's really a tough spot that I'm in, because I get so many, contacts, including yourself, Farah, with these great products and, all these kind of, AI and machine learning and, automated and so much more efficient. But being a company my size, we really outsource everything 100%. And what I'd like to do in my next trial down the line is really come up with sort of a vendor, I shouldn't say vendor, but a solution plan that looks at everything and says, we're not going to be going to sites potentially to monitor in all regions. What does that look like? There's so many, having been on a number of calls over the summer or webinars, attending them, there are so many solutions now that I think those service providers will really play a valuable role. And someone actually asked me recently, Farah, about your offering, and whether I had used it and why not. So at some point, the tipping scale is sort of, how much time do I have when I'm not running around doing other things? And yet I could probably get a lot more done if I wasn't running around with paperwork. So we'll see. Well, that's everything I had. I don't know, Sam, if there's anything else you need.
Is there anybody else with any other questions for Audrey?
Yeah, I have a question, and I've worked in really big companies and really tiny companies, and certainly empathize with the notion of having a very small team and having to outsource things and therefore be dependent upon the performance of people that you sometimes don't have that much control over. Do you ever find yourself sort of making the case that by bringing something in-house, it could, you mentioned the quality, speed, you know, those three that you know, often have to play against each other. Do you ever find yourself making the case that you could do something faster, better, and cheaper by bringing it in-house, or is that just not an option with the state of where your company is at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. We just have adopted a online quality management system tool in my quality group. So I haven't really taken something, you know, whether it's, you know, SaaS or an application or something and gone with it myself. However, the middle ground is when we were running a study that's since been closed because we are a pulmonary company. So, you know, we have to think about what that looks like for folks going into a COVID treating facility. But I started finding some innovative partners where I could say, I think we need this company to help us find and support referring physicians. I think this company is an AI machine learning company that can actually help us select sites and countries. So, you know, trying to make the case to say, we need to do things differently. We can't just rely on what we've been doing. So it's kind of a hybrid. But I'm, you know, if I had more time, I would definitely spend more time looking at those things. There are so many things out there right now. But again, you know, my focus will probably have to shift to some of the more remote monitoring, remote source document verification. Closing a study now, we're trying to remote drug accountability. You know, in-home nursing visits, we'll have to look at some point, you know, telemedicine. So, you know, I think we're getting there. I think for me, it's what I find is when I've been in companies that, you know, adopted something internally, it looks like it's like, here, clinical, have this trial master file system. And it's like, no, you need an IT person, you need to be validated, you need quality to weigh in. It's not just something you can just adapt that quickly.
And I think the other problem, which sometimes one runs into, is leaders, CEOs, or whoever you deal with that have a little bit of knowledge and therefore, you know, identify solutions that, you know, really don't make sense and, you know, oftentimes driven by cost and so on. And then, you know, obviously it depends upon the background and certainly any horror stories in the past, but that's another thing I think that frequently comes up when, you know, the leader doesn't necessarily appreciate the limits of his or her own experience.
That's something that's I'm about to encounter, and I won't get into it here, but I did recently do a talk on CRO, I think I did on CRO selection, and I have an RFP and a scorecard that I've put together, but that's a sort of a topic for another day. But yeah, I'm going to be finding myself exactly in that sandbox very soon, I'm sure. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, if anybody figures out how to handle that, I think that would be a great talk.
Sure. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. And we do have a service provider. I think you mentioned one of your slides. Their name is JSSS Medical Research. And pretty much that full one-stop shop. So definitely do look into their company for your future studies. It's called JSS Medical Research. And
yes, I met with them actually right before the pandemic. I met with them at our offices, and you know, we did the fist bump because we couldn't shake hands. So they're definitely on my list.
Awesome. Thank you, Audrey, again.
Okay. Bye.